Welcome to the How Did That Work Out podcast, where we share, explore, as well as inspect internally and externally a variety of our life situations as well as others, all for the purpose of answering how did that work out. I'm your host, Graham.
And I'm your host, Mike J.
Here we go.
All right.
Hey man, how's it going?
It's going great. It's a Tuesday. Yesterday was a holiday, so that's working out pretty well.
How'd you spend your holiday?
Really just working on my technical stuff, working on my office a little bit. It's a work in progress. So, I'm trying to implement like a theme for it. And so it's going little by little, definitely not as fast as my wife would like. That's for sure.
Yeah.
She came in like, gosh, this was like sometime last year. She came in and like cleaned everything top to bottom, moved everything out to reorganize, rearrange, and then we moved back in only the things I needed. And then it got messy again because I keep ordering from Amazon, and so all these boxes keep coming in, and I save boxes because if something doesn't work or it's not what I expected, I want to return it.
Yeah.
The next thing you know, the office is full of empty cardboard boxes and also product packaging. So I'm putting forward a more concerted effort to not just, keep the boxes at bay, but to also organize all my cables and whatnot, and all while embracing, a theme, for the office, or a look, if you will. So I'm really tied to the industrial, look. So, I'm adding metal accents, wherever I can. So like for my cable management, my desk faces the door. So it makes it hard to hide cables when there's no wall to hide them. So I thought I would do some cable management and make it look nice, maybe tuck it under the desk so that all you saw were the cables from the items on top of your desk kind of go underneath your desk and then be gone. Well, I was trying to use these plastic ties that stick to the bottom of your desk, and then it holds the cables. And I kept finding that the ties would not stay. They would come unstuck. And so now you've got these hanging cords and and cables with a plastic tie tied to it, but it's not attached to the table anymore. So everything's sagging and drooping.
Yep.
So I thought, okay, how do I fix this?
All right. How'd you fix it?
Well, okay. So meaning, I wanted to embrace the industrial look, right? So I thought, okay, what can I do as a 2-for-1? How can I embrace my aesthetic?
Did you get a rivet gun?
Oh, well, not too far. Not too far. So what I did was I bought clamps, metal clamps that, they're C-shaped clamps, right? So they're shaped like a C, and you screw them, and then they act like a vise, right? So you have a bottom and a top, right? You have the C, and then you screw the bottom until it gets as tight as you need it, and then it literally clamps onto whatever you want to clamp it to. So I bought like 6 of those, and I put my cabling inside the C, and then I attached the clamp to my desk, to the end of my desk. So now you have these metallic clamps strategically placed on the outside of my desk with cable running through it. So it does look a little grunge, but at the same time, that's kind of the intent, right? I mean, if it's industrial, you've got exposed wiring and ducting and things of that sort. So it kind of gives that vibe while also keeping my cables from drooping.
Yeah. That's nice, man. That's nice.
Well, I probably didn't describe it great. I should probably take a picture of it, but
well, I mean, it's at least conceptually you've got form and function happening at the same time.
Both at the same time.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty happy with it. I thought, wow, this was probably the most creative I'd been in a while in terms of solving a problem, but also not not giving up on the aesthetic I was trying to reach. It was pretty pat on my back type situation here, where it was like, wow, not only did you solve the problem, you also you also enhanced the look you were going for.
Right.
You added to it. So it was like, oh, right on. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, it's all been an ongoing part of, trying to make the office a little, again, clean and organized and not just a dumping place. It's a place of work. Obviously I want to move the podcast studio to the office so that, I've got a desk and I've got access to multiple screens and what have you. So with all that being said, how was
Yeah, it
your
makes a
days?
big difference when you really like being where you work, the environment you create. Um, we rearranged my office about a week or so ago. The desk was facing the door. We've got all the cable management going on, but we spun it around, and now the bookcases, like the one you can see behind me, and the other one, and the desk only occupy half of the length of the room. So the other half has these nice kind of Eames style chairs over there, and it's just opened it up a lot. And then I've got some natural light coming in like directly onto me versus it was kind of hitting me on the side before.
Right.
And my wife added this candle that it's the funniest concept, but it smells so good. It's perfect for what I've got. I've got a lot of wood and metal going on in here, like on one of these bookcases. Do you remember if you ever went to and this is old timey, like even when I was a kid, they were considered old timey. If you went to like gym class or a public pool, or even in colleges, if there was a pool, they had these little cubbies for you to put your swim clothes when you were done, your wet stuff, and they were these little caged boxes, and they'd have a number on them.
Yes.
There's like 3 of those sitting over there with books in them and stuff. But the candle, its scent is tobacco and honey.
Wow. Okay. That's pretty masculine.
It has the most distinct, and I don't know if it's just like old man cologne plus the smell of bourbon combined. It smells like a I don't know. It's unique, and I've really come to like it.
So now it's more like a drawing room or a parlor versus a home office.
Yeah, it's a parlor. I do parlor tricks and
while you sip your brandy. And,
plot and scheme and all that stuff. So yeah, man, good luck on your office aesthetic journey.
Thanks. It's a journey, not a destination, and yet I think my wife wants it to be a destination, like ASAP.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to rush it, because if you rush it, then you're not going to be happy with it. And then you're not going to really take care of it, because it was like, I'm just doing it to please somebody else. I'd rather do it so that it pleases me at a pace that pleases me. So it's an ongoing project that I can always go back to whenever if I've ever run out of things to do, then I can always go back to that. Or it's something where I can make time for, set aside that time, and then actually look forward to that time, that I've set aside. And it's funny that you mentioned candles, because part of my new thing in my office is I bought a coffee warmer, which is kind of like a mini hot plate.
Right.
And I also bought a bunch of candles to put on the coffee warmer when I'm not drinking coffee.
Yeah.
So that, we've tried the plug-in air fresheners. We've tried the kind that just kind of sit there. We've tried, all kind, and they do smell great, but they don't last, and they're not prevalent. It's too easy for the aroma to sink into the background. Whereas these candles, you let them go for a little bit until they completely melt inside their glass jar.
Yeah.
It fills the room, and you can even smell it when you're coming into the room.
Right.
Not just as soon as you're in. You got to kind of really look for it. It's there. It's all around and it's pleasant. So like you're using candle, I'm using more like tropical aromas and, citrus and things of that sort. So,
Nice.
Maybe not as masculine as tobacco, but
Tobacco.
yeah, but they do have like leather scented candles and things like that. So I don't know if I'll venture that quite that far, but I like vanilla. So just the smell of vanilla. So I have a vanilla candle that I'll throw on every now and then just to kind of give it a neutral but kind of on the sweeter side of pleasant. So
yeah, without getting a cavity when you smell it. I think
yeah,
like those Yankee candles where you can just kind of feel yourself gaining weight when you smell them.
yes, exactly, exactly. And when they do it after food, like pound cake, like lemon pound cake and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, what are you doing to me here?
Yeah, triple decker heart attack.
Yeah. So I go for the, maybe the more outdoorsy, kind of natural type scents versus baked goods.
There you go. Yeah, no, to your question, yesterday was good. I worked and I took a nice long bike ride. I've, I've been finding a couple times that I'll find people in our neighborhood. There's a small handful of trails, but then there's this one trail network that is just bananas, and it's so fun, and it's really made me step up my biking game. And now I go out there and I try to beat my time. Not every time because I'm human and inconsistent, but when I'm having a good day, yesterday I did my best time out there, and I keep finding like strays, like people who got out here but they're not sure how to get back where they came from. So yesterday was my second gig as a trail Sherpa, where I'm basically escorting people out of our neighborhood. they're like, they're like, hey, and I'm really, I'd say, cordial on the trails.
Okay.
A lot of people get into aggro mode and they're listening to Black Death speed metal and getting all, amped up, typically guys.
Right. Yeah.
And, that's sometimes me, but not when you interact with other people. You have to be a decent human being. I'm always real friendly, try to make, see if, hey, is this someone I might talk to later if I see them, and you never know, you're out there by yourself too. So
Right.
something happens to you, you want to extend some goodwill. So both these people had been like waiting on somebody, or they didn't know how to get out, and it's nice to ride with other people. You learn stuff too.
Right. Sure.
So I'm like, yeah, come on, I'll show you. Do you want to go the most direct route or the funnest route? And one guy wanted to go the funnest route, and one lady wanted to go the most direct route, and it was good. It was good.
Well, didn't it used to be the code though, the outdoors, where you were a good Samaritan to others? Like, if you're camping and, somebody forgot their stove, you'd offer up your stove, to let them cook, or you'd, help them hook up their camp or whatever it was. I used to camp when I was younger, grew up in California. So we used to go to the mountains a lot. When I was young, my uncles would take me, my dad would take me.
Mm-hmm.
And you always kind of helped each other out. And, but now it sounds like the outdoor adventure has turned into a singular, an individual, space where you rage. Your workout is based on rage,
Right.
rather than really appreciating that you're outside and that you're, among nature. And I would think that if you've got music blaring in your ears because you want to get that intense workout, that you're foregoing all the other stimuli going on while you're on the ride. So in other words, the ride, the pedaling, right, is the exercise. The music is, also the motivator, but it also, I think, drowns out a lot of what you really would be outside to ride for. I mean, am I off base on that?
I mean, it's specific to the individual. So bike riding outdoors to me is supplemental to an indoor workout, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely with purpose because I used to go to the gym 3 to 5 times a week. And then, with the pandemic, being indoors with anybody was deadly. So I got back into biking again. And biking kind of has to happen outside. You can do the stationary bikes, but again, you're stuck back inside.
Right.
Yeah. For me, the intention isn't to, connect with nature. It's fun to be out in nature. You got the fresh air, you got the views, and you're dealing with like real terrain.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know if you could compare it to camping. Those are two very different, like intents and approaches.
Yeah. I just meant more like, when you're outdoors, you're like you are right now, you're being more of a helpful sort. Whereas some other people are like, hey, I'm in my bubble. Don't come near me. You can hear the music coming out of their earphones. But I look at it more like, well, if you're going to basically take your ride outside, I mean, some music as background is one thing. But when you're like I'm just basing it off of what you said. Like, you can hear people with the metal music going through their earphones and whatnot. I just think that, well, if you want to do that, then get a Peloton. Now, if you want to put on some music that obviously motivates you, but you still take time during your ride to appreciate the surroundings, appreciate the outside. Whereas I think a lot of people want to go retreat into their own world and forget that they're outside, even though they are outside getting their workout. So if you want to have music blaring, get a Peloton. If you want to have some light music and you want to enjoy the scenery, then I think your approach is better in that regard. I just think everything has its place, and I think some people really miss out on a lot of opportunity when they blare their music and they want to go for that really rage-filled, intense ride, where all they see is the road in front of them and all they hear is the music, pumping in their ears. I think you're missing out on a lot.
Yeah, maybe. I will say this, when I go for walks, it's just no devices, no reading the news, no nothing in my ear. Those are like, you want to hear all that stuff. You also want to hear if someone's coming up behind you.
Right. Right.
I'll be riding behind people walking, and I've got the funniest little like 3-year-old bike bell, bing bing, and I'll just be hammering it, and they don't hear me. I'm like, you're doing yourself a disservice. Like somebody could be running up on you, a bear,
right?
Or in this neck of the woods, a mountain lion.
Yeah. Well, exactly, and I even see those commercials with people have the cans on their ears, right, and they're walking down a city street, on the sidewalk and whatnot, and there's a crowd hustling and bustling, and of course the commercial wants you to buy those headphones so that you get lost and immersed in the music and you forget the world outside of you. But when you're in a big city, you don't have that luxury to forget the world outside of you, because if you do that, then that makes you a target, right? So then, rather than enjoying the music, you're going to be, on the ground, mugged, and wishing you had, paid attention to your surroundings instead of getting lost in your music.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, again, time and a place. If you're sitting on a train or a subway or something, because your back is facing something that, and your eyes are facing forward, so you can at least still have some, way of knowing. But when you're walking down the street and your back is totally vulnerable, and then you've got music going on and you're just floating on air, well, that's to me, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, I think time and place you nailed it with that. I think it's, discretionary, situational. It's not black or white, yes or no, this or that. It's use your best judgment.
Right.
Which you hear all your life. And as we find out, everyone's best judgment. One man's best judgment is another man's worst judgment.
Well, you couldn't have said it. Truer words have never been spoken, is what I'll say.
Here. Hey, and on that, you want to take a little coffee refill break?
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and do that.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the follow button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you so much. Now, back to the show.
And we're back.
Awesome.
So we talked about office renovation, or at least like makeover, overhaul. Makeover doesn't sound very manly, but and we talked about courtesy out in the conceptual wild and in the real wild.
For sure.
Time and place.
Well, I know that last week while we were talking, I noticed you jotted down some notes, and I think that was going to be our intention to kind of maybe circle back and maybe dive a little deeper on some of the notes that you had taken that we had just basically touched on last week. You want to share what you wrote down, or?
I do, and there's a couple little things I've been sitting on too. And I mean, we're so early on into this. To be sitting on stuff is like, what? We don't have any history behind us. But just some like interesting. Let me start with this one. This is going back to trail riding and being, kind of a good Boy Scout, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
When there's this concept that I don't even know what you call it. It's an experience I've had a couple of times in my life, and it's been really pronounced once when I was like 19, and then again when I was when I ran into some guy out in the trails.
Okay.
And it's called Me Versus You turns to Us Versus Them. When I was 19, I worked in this restaurant. It just opened, and I helped open the restaurant. Like I was helping, pick out stuff to use in the pots and pans to use in the kitchen, and how things would be laid out. I worked in the kitchen for a while, and then I went and waited tables. And there was this one guy. He was just, for some reason, always just a little jagged toward me. He would be nice to me because other guys were being nice to me, but it seemed specific, right? It seemed personal. I was like, why is he such an asshole to me? And I began to not like him. I'm 19, so I'm not super well. I'm 47 now, and I'm not super emotionally mature, but at that time you're like, yeah, fuck that guy. He's a dick, And we'd all sometimes go play tennis after work or go play pool after work. And one time we were playing pool, and this was in a bar. Yeah, I'm 19. I'm in a bar. That's fine. And these two guys, a little bit older than us, wanted to play, and me and this other guy, his name was Bill. We were pretty good, mm-hmm. So we teamed up, and all of a sudden the dynamic just changed. We had been on a team. We waited tables, sort of, but now it was, instead of me against him, it was now us against them. And I had all of a sudden inside of me, I had a different relationship with Bill. Bill didn't know about it, but I did. It was just this feeling that washed over me. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. You took in the moment to say, wait a minute, our dynamic just changed. And you now have a common goal, which is to beat the other guys at pool. I think there's two ways to look at a team. When you're on a team at work, you are combining and pooling your resources for a specific outcome. But when you're on a team and you're competing, I think there is the drive really comes out. In other words, you may have drive as a work team to put out your best work, but there's not really any competition because you're not comparing. Unless you're bidding on something, somebody's not going to say, well, let's take team A and team B and we'll pick the better one to use, maybe in a creative sense, but in a normal office setting, that's not how it works. You assign a team to a project because you want something done, right? And then the team pools together and gets that thing done. So there's their common goal. But when your common goal is competition and to beat someone else, and I don't know if that's just, men, I don't know if it takes place in women too, but it just seems like it calls to our, inner caveman where, we tribe, they tribe, our tribe better than their tribe, so it becomes very, just as simplistic as it can be, which is I need to be better than those people over there. And since I have somebody with me who also wants that, right, the competition now, it becomes your unifying factor.
Well, yeah, and you can distill that down to the common enemy unites, right?
Correct.
And that was almost 30 years ago. And the reason this is front of mind for me today is because I was out on the trail, and there was this long straightaway, and I saw a guy probably 50 yards in front of me. A really long straight. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to catch him. You're just like, yeah. And there's that boost I was looking for. And so I caught him, and he stopped, and he had already kind of stopped when I caught up to him. And I just rode past him saying, hey man, you having a good ride? He's like, yeah. I'm like, cool. And I just kept going. And then I hear him like say something. So I turned down my rage music.
Oh, you're that guy.
And he's like, hey, and he started asking a lot of questions about the trails, and we started talking. And then there's this, this natural moment when you're talking to a stranger, you introduce yourself at some point because you're like, okay, we got a rapport. But the first thing he said when I asked him, hey, you having a good ride? He's like, anything's better than this. And I didn't take offense to it, but I was just like, this trail segment is awesome. Everyone loves this. I don't know what your problem is, so I'm going to keep on going. It was like that.
Yeah.
And he was complaining about the climbs and all the this and that. And I was like, okay, cool. And he seemed like he didn't know his way out, but he didn't want to admit it. And I was like, yeah, you can follow me out. He's like, I'm not worried about getting lost. Like everything I said was kind of needed to be corrected by him. Do you understand?
Yeah.
I've dealt with people like that, and it's really, it's draining. So I was just like, yeah, I want to go. Well, he ended up following me out, and I was like, I'm going to kill him with kindness. I'm not going to let this ruin my ride. He's like, and he started asking questions again about how to get here or there. I go, hey, follow me. I'll take you there. And he was a good rider. He's a really good rider. He's just kind of jerky. And I said, hey, he wanted to take the fun way. So I took him along this real fun way. And I was like, well, your way from here, I think. He's like, yeah. I'm like, all right. And this whole time in my head, I'm like, hope I never see this jerk again. But all of a sudden, this group of like 5 bikers come up. And again, all of a sudden, it's us against them because we're a little team and they're a little team, and you have to represent. You don't like 5 guys don't roll up on you and you go, no, we're going to take you individually. But it was the weirdest feeling all over again, and so our dynamic shifted and the conversation changed. The tone mellowed a little bit. It was so bananas, man.
I don't know what to say to that in the sense that, here you had a guy. What I'm hearing about you describing that guy is that, I think a lot of times we're our own worst enemy. We get in our own way because we see it as a sign of weakness to ask for help. So he wasn't going to overtly ask for help, but he was going to throw out all the signs showing he needed help by complaining and getting grumpy and bristling at the fact that you would offer. And yet, it's so funny, yet he still took you up on everything that you had offered without saying yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I'm zeroing in on right now. And I know that's not the focus of your story, but then the dynamic does change, and you now have this common goal, right? Which is to show those 5 what's up. And I think that's like, if you think about it, that's kind of like a formula in a lot of movies, right? Where everybody's at each other's throats, right? And then something external happens to them, and then they band together, and now they fight together, and they, they look out for one another. And it's, I don't know, there's something I think that gives us that warm and encouraged feeling that shows that, okay, we can be completely different people, right? But when something confronts us both at the same time and the stakes are high, right? Well, maybe not 5 riders being, high stakes, but when it comes down to it, the stakes are kind of high because you're not going to let them show you up.
Yeah, my ego is high stakes.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Especially as dudes, right? We're not going to let somebody just kind of, storm into our turf and take it over. So there are, I think, a lot of examples where that happens, and perhaps that's something we can look for actively, is more opportunities, right, to, I don't want to say bond, but more opportunities to, interact with others by finding that thing that you both can relate to, unite against, things like that.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And I think people with sort of prickly or off-putting personalities, by this time in their life, they're very aware of it, but they are who they are, and they get varied reactions. And I think when they get a reaction that isn't like that handles them with a little bit of kid gloves, I think they're cool with that. They're like, okay, I can be my jerky self, and you'll put up with it. So
yeah. Some people thrive on that, right? Some people thrive on the negative energy, believe it or not. I mean, some people will create a negative space, hoping that you'll react firmly, and if you don't, then they kind of see you as weak.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And hoping that you react thusly or fussly or this way or that way. Yeah. Everyone's got their own.
Right. They want to kind of draw you into that and see what kind of person you are. Give me what you got. And then if you just don't engage, they're going to be like, oh, well, that's a weak person I wouldn't want to be around anyway.
Yeah. And if you match fire with fire, sometimes that's explosive, and that's not good.
Yeah. And it's like, wait, he's trying to outdo me. And then you get more aggro. So with some people, it's kind of hard to find that sweet spot, isn't it? Where, you try to find out how, where they're operating at. And then you either, and it's so funny, I mean, even in the nonverbal stuff, you try to find, okay, where are they operating? And are they, is this a situation where I match it, or I come in a little bit under, or I come in a little bit over? We're always feeling each other out, believe it or not, to find out where is this person's sweet spot, because what you're giving out isn't necessarily what you're expecting to give back, and vice versa, right? What what somebody else is giving out, you may view that as different levels of being, right, that you may or may not agree with. So it's just funny how we're all putting out these signals, whether we realize it or not, and then we all respond to the feedback of those signals in varying ways. And it's not always consistent, is it? I mean, sometimes it's based on mood, right?
Yeah. Circumstantial. Yeah. So after those 5 guys rolled off, we swapped some tips on equipment and technique and went our separate ways. And I wouldn't mind running into him again based on that.
Okay. Well, I mean, not somebody you'd actively seek out to ride with, but if you saw him, it's not the end of your day,
Yeah.
So at least there's that. That's a win.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw out a few topics.
Okay.
From ye old notebook.
Cool.
And put you on the spot and let you pick. Does that sound good?
I'm down.
Okay. So in conversations we've had previous, we always kind of dip, and we either like cannonball into it, or we just keep skimming across the water. You like those analogies?
I do.
So and a couple ones that we just dipped in was the nuances of quitting or staying at a job, right? Okay. The other one is frameworks, and depending on what lens you're looking at that word through, it means so many different things.
It does.
Frameworks. Organizational skills. That came up when you and I were talking about how ridiculously slammed 2021 has made me. It ain't messing around, and I've got to run a tight ship. And then stoicism. In conversations we've had, you've mentioned stoicism a few times, and to be 100% honest, I can't say I'm familiar with. Like, it's not something I could bring up in conversation and speak to.
Sure.
And I don't know, for maybe people who don't know and are interested, talk about it as a life concept and maybe some of the major players over time?
I think I'll take Stoicism for 100, Alex.
In the form of a question, please. R.I.P.
Yeah.
Big guy. Love that guy.
So no, I like the idea of the Stoicism, and it's not something that I live every day by. It's something I strive toward, and I think that if we're gonna, as individuals, if we're gonna try to expand our level of being in the sense that we want to try to be better every day, that maybe we try to take something on that might, help us. This does tie into frameworks, believe it or not, that gives us a framework that we still have plenty of room to maneuver within a framework. And the framework itself isn't even rigid, where if you go out of bounds, you're ruined. Yeah. So Stoicism, I started looking into it around the time I was getting very miserable at my previous employment. And I know I railed on that a lot in the previous episode, but I was looking for ways to cope, and I was almost desperate to find a way to cope. So I turned to writing. So I used to write, and I would actually post my things in what I would call a semi-anonymous blog. So, I would write my thoughts, and then I would actually spend time, polishing that, and then publishing it. And it was a way for me to get my thoughts out. And I'll turn to the Stoicism here in just a second, the Stoicism part of that. But what I found is that, okay, I'm writing for me, and it was great to get things out, and then I'd publish it. And the way it was this, it's this note-taking app. And so you can write notes down, but you can also publish your notes if you want. And then it's already pre-formatted, and it becomes a little blog. So I was doing this, publishing it out loud, if you will, but not really saying who I am or where I worked. I mean, I didn't want to do that, but it would help me with my observations of others and my observations of how I'm handling certain situations, and really go into my feelings and what do I really want from this or from that or whatever. And I thought, well, nobody's reading it, but that's okay, right? And then I found it had a guest book feature. And so I was looking at the guest book, and I was getting so much positive feedback, thanking me for sharing myself, for chronicling my journey, and, encouraging me to, keep it up. You're going to find what works. You're going to find something better out there. Just praising, the approach and the attitude and everything. And I was just blown away. I was like, the support came out of nowhere, and I didn't think anybody was even reading this thing, right? But there were, obviously. So I started looking at writing as kind of a bridge into that Stoicism thing. Okay. And I was looking at Stoicism as maybe a way for me to build kind of a shield, okay, against the things that I feel were chipping away at me, wearing me down, and making me less of a better person. Okay. So if we're to look at Stoicism, like I've got a definition, kind of a definition here, and it says, basically Stoicism was designed to help people live their best possible lives. It's a philosophy of life that maximizes positive emotions, reduces negative emotions, and helps individuals to hone their virtues of character. Okay, so there might be a lot in there, but basically what it's saying is that it challenges you to be a better person by focusing on the positive, even in a larger negative situation or those emotions. Be conscious of those negative emotions, okay, but how do you work through them so that those negative emotions might spawn, positive thoughts, positive feelings, okay, perhaps even a positive plan of action. So, just to read a little further, it says, at any moment, in any situation, and at any stage of life, Stoicism provides a framework for living well. It reminds people of what is truly important, providing practical strategies to get more of what's valuable. Stoicism was deliberately created to be understandable, actionable, and useful. Okay, so I liked it because it didn't require a lot of learning of how to be something. It didn't require, if you're going to do it right, you got to do it this way. Right. It's really based on a lot on the individual. Okay. And there are some Stoics throughout history that we may or may not have known were Stoics. Marcus Aurelius probably being one of the more famous, the Roman emperor. And he's basically known as like the best, Stoic leader in history. And his story real quick was that he was born into an influential family, but no one at the time had expected that one day he would actually be the ruler of the empire. And so what he did is, as he was, he led wars, and he also had political rivals that he had to deal with, and he had a kingdom to rule, right? So what he did is he turned to writing, and he would write his meditations in his tent. He would, take time at night to reflect on the day he just had, and then also to make a bit of a plan for the next day, while acknowledging certain things aren't going to change, right? The negative aspects aren't going to change. But what he would do in his writing, which was really just for him, it was a journal, but he would then use that negativity to challenge himself to be better, to overcome in a positive way, instead of fighting fire with fire, but then while also accepting his place, right, in that negative cycle.
Now, is it possible he was a Stoic and he didn't know it? like, did he invent it, or was it already something in existence at his time?
I can't find anything that would suggest that this was an intentional thing for him and not just a coping mechanism, much like what I was looking for.
Right.
But what's funny is that somebody had turned his writings into a book that you can actually buy today, and it's basically called Meditations, or the Book of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And it was taking his journal, and the thing about that is that you can maybe relate to some of the things that he was enduring, maybe not like for like, but what I'm saying is, like, if you've got political rivals, well, then maybe you've got somebody at work that you're not getting along with particularly well. And, they actively try to subvert you.
Yeah. The sword sharpening guy never gets my sword as sharp as I want it.
Exactly. And it also used to help him cope with the stress of leadership and the stress of war, which leads to loss. And he actually did care about his empire quite a bit. He wasn't one of those excessive Roman emperors. In fact, part of his stoicism was he chose to live humbly. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't arrogant. He was very humble in how he lived, how he spoke, and how he led. So he could also be credited with being one of the earliest servant leaders as well, which is kind of a new buzzword that's kind of catching on, which I think is great, because too many times leaders think of themselves as the tip of a pyramid, which everything flows to the top, and the top person says what is and what isn't. And yeah, that's a feeling of power. But when you're a servant leader, you're actually at the bottom of the pyramid, providing that foundation. And what you're doing is you're working for your team so that they can succeed. And the team then, usually would come to realize that that's the case. And then they work harder, right? That ultimately helps you succeed.
Yeah.
And so it's very much a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, I'm very familiar. And I heavily subscribe to being a servant leader. My former business partner, I kind of just in natural conversation mentioned to him that that's my style of leadership, and he looked at me like I had a horn growing out of my forehead. I'm like, all right.
To some people, it's foreign. I mean, they really believe in a hierarchical sense, and there is a hierarchy. Even if you're a servant leader, There is a hierarchy, but that hierarchy is inherited more than taken.
It's earned. Yeah.
It is, because then you become the person that the team can trust, that you're not going to do things that are only in your interest and not theirs, that you've demonstrated that everything that you say and do is in their interest for success.
Yeah. The way I kind of translated and morphed it to work for me was to kind of, the people around you, when you're a leader, you've chosen them to be around you, or someone you chose to be around you chose them to be around you, and enabling them to do their best to shine, to do the thing you need them to do was my job.
Mm-hmm.
Was to clear out roadblocks for them, not do the things for them, but give them either tools or opportunities to just be their best at what they do.
That's really well put. I agree. And even in the military, I embraced a form of servant leadership, which you would think the military is very specific in how, rank structure is and how you lead.
Mm-hmm.
But believe it or not, it still allows for an individual personality, a leadership style within. And the sad thing is that some people think that their style is working when if you stepped outside yourself for 2 minutes, you'd see it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But some people are sensitive to certain feedback, meaning that they can see things without them having to be said, right? Or they can feel things without them having to be spoken and things like that. And others are just clueless. They're just raging bulls that think that because nobody's complaining out loud, they must be doing everything right.
Right.
Whereas I took more of a servant leadership style in the military, and I didn't do it to be liked. I did it because, I've seen what happens. You can beat people over the head constantly, with a message or with, how you want things to be. And sometimes all that does is increase the resistance to it. Whereas if you work with somebody and you help them identify the path forward, then they've bought into it because they had a stake in it. And therefore, they're going to be more accountable for it, right?
It's a lot like raising children, right?
It is.
If you can get them to buy in, to have a say-so or some input, they all of a sudden start to own the decision.
Well, exactly, because they are part owner, right? Or it was their, it was their idea, right? To an extent. I mean, sometimes you can lead somebody down that path where you can make your idea a suggestion, and maybe that's the root of what the actual end result ends up being, right? That was the little kernel of it, but overall, when you give other people a say, you give them you're giving them a vested interest in the success of that thing.
That's right. Yeah, totally agree. So, what are some of the any belief system or anything, basically anything that exists always has critics. What are some of the common criticisms of Stoicism?
Just in, again, in my uneducated, pursuit of this, in other words, I'm not studying, the books on Stoicism. I mean, I'll listen to a podcast here and there. I'll watch a YouTube video around it. And I would say that some of the critics of it would say that with Stoicism, you're either in denial of the situation as it really is because you're always looking for the positive. So you're not really embracing the seriousness of it, or you don't understand the impact that something can have because you're always looking for that silver lining, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Others could say that with Stoicism, because Stoicism is based more on logic than emotion. So, Stoicism encourages you to think about a situation, think through a situation, and develop a path forward that is logical and is free of emotion. Because while others are being emotional, you as the Stoic are being the logical. Therefore, you can see answers that others can't see through their emotion. So some might even say then, as a Stoic, that you lack empathy, or even compassion, which is certainly not the case, right? I mean, but you're looking at things through a different lens, and even like, okay, so Seneca the Younger, Seneca was also a well-known Stoic, and with Seneca, he was accused a lot of having like no feelings. Okay, and he was even imprisoned by the Roman Emperor Claudius, because basically he thought that since Seneca, I'm going to back up a bit here. So I'm going to say here that when Claudius became emperor, he exiled Seneca to the island of Corsica. 8 years later, Agrippina, the mother of the future emperor Nero, and the widow of Claudius, granted him permission to return and become her son's tutor. Seneca's death came under the orders of Nero himself, who thought Seneca was part of a plot against him. And so, again, from what I understand, his lack of emotion kind of put people off, because he would try to look at things for what they were, and look at what the options existed for what they were, versus letting the emotion of the moment rule his path. And so I do believe that's why Nero actually thought that Seneca was plotting against him, because Seneca basically never got riled. So if you never get riled and you're just always there, straight faced when everybody else is either freaking out or laughing hysterically or whatever, and you're the one that's just kind of sitting there, stoically, it kind of puts people off. Like, what is, doesn't this person see what we see? And so when you're going against the pack, you're not always favored.
No. Yeah. Well, the pack.
Exactly. The groupthink even, right? So,
yeah.
But in any case, to bring it back to, why Stoicism interests me, is because that I feel that if I can understand Stoicism better, then I can use it as a tool, not just when I'm surrounded by the negative, but I can also use it as a tool when I'm surrounded by the positive, so that you can look at things again for what they are logically. And if it's in the positive, you can then take a look at, okay, what brought that about and how can I continue that, right? But you can also kind of do a kind of a risk assessment as well, based on, okay, I'm in a good place right now. What could get in the way of that? And how do I prepare for that? So Stoicism is also about that preparation. So when you reflect, you're reflecting on the lessons of the day that would then help you to cope, for the unknowns of tomorrow. Okay. So that you have a plan of preparation. It's almost like Stoicism was the basis of the saying that goes, plan for the worst, but hope for the best. I mean, that's Stoicism, if you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. By everything you've said so far, the math works out.
Well, and again, it's a method. And I would say that Stoicism, because of the humility behind it, but also it advocates, simplicity. Don't overcomplicate things, because when you do that, you're going to bring about a negative income, because you yourself or others that you place trust in, if you make things too complicated, it's almost certain to fail. So you keep things as simple as they can be, right? As rudimentary as it can be, so that it's achievable, right? And so I think that also ties a bit into minimalism, because Marcus Aurelius did live minimally, right? He didn't lavish himself with luxury. He chose to be that servant leader, and also by being that servant leader decided to live like a common person. Okay. And so therefore he felt he was no better or no worse than the people that he ruled in his kingdom. He felt kind of an equal to them. And while that may or may not be true, I mean, can somebody of a higher position ever truly be equal? No, but you can empathize with other people because we all have a position, right? So it encourages that empathy that people think that Stoicism lacks. But it also, in the simplicity of your plan or the simplicity of your thoughts, encourages also minimalism, which is, basically living with the things, materialistically living with the things around you that serve a purpose and discarding everything that doesn't.
Right.
So that you avoid clutter. And, when you have clutter, it creates complexity. And when you have complexity, right, you have stress. And, so basically minimalism and Stoicism, I think, together make for a much simpler way of living and being and even thinking and even approaching things, but not to the detriment of that you are numb, right? Or that you don't feel others' pain, or that because you live minimally that you're, you don't watch TV or listen to radio. I mean, that's not the case. I mean, you can live a normal life, but by choosing to live lighter in your possessions, lighter in your thoughts, lighter in your actions even, it creates a kind of a blissful state.
Yeah. Seems like it takes, going back to reference, sort of leading by servitude and not living in luxury based on your status. Seems like it takes a lot of discipline and humility, but it also, now anyway, seems like it would take a good bit of untraining to what we understand to be like social hierarchies, right? Like because it seems like an unnatural, like almost counterintuitive mindset, but with phenomenal results.
No, you're absolutely right. It is unconventional wisdom in the sense that less is more, right? The less complicated the plan, the more effective it has, it can become. So you're absolutely right. It does require a different way to look at things. And what's funny is that I stumbled upon both Stoicism and minimalism, which again, I'm not there on either one, but I am striving to one day be a minimalist and to incorporate more Stoicism into my daily life. But it came from a place of pain. It came about, my search came from, me being in a state of pain. And I think that's, as humans, when we're most likely to make a change. Not when we're happy and things are going great. Why would we? Mm-hmm. Right? But when we're in a state of pain, then we look for those things. So I would encourage, anybody listening, that even if you're in a good place, maybe look into some of these philosophies. And again, they're not rigid, but just look into it to see if it can even help enhance your current positive state, or if it can help you prolong that positive state by looking for things that could end it, right, or impede it. So there's a lot of reasons that when you're in a good place that you would want to look for something different as well. Not to break something that isn't broken, but to keep that thing that isn't broken from breaking.
Yeah, and at the very least to round out the corners, just to reduce friction. A lot of these things that we bring into our lives, they either kind of bring pleasure or pain, and it's not always up front, right? Something could be immediately pleasurable and then later it's painful. So smoothing that stuff out, so you can kind of stack your happiness on top of those little achievements is a good idea.
Well, and again, that's where I say it's a bit of risk assessment, but it's also risk mitigation. And that's kind of a technical term that we use in technical projects. Is we do a risk assessment to find out, okay, what could prevent this project from being as absolutely successful as possible. And then risk mitigation is, what is your plan should the risks that you identified show up, but also what is your plan if a risk you didn't identify shows up? So you kind of have to have a plan for the unplanned.
Yeah.
And that's why I say it really, to encapsulate it, it's, you plan for the, you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. And that's where that comes from, is because when you plan for the worst, you're thinking of every possible thing that could go wrong, and you have a way to address it because you thought of it beforehand. So it's nothing new when it appears. Whereas if you don't give any thought to what could go wrong to anything, right? Whether, it's your job or whether it's a relationship, if you don't give any thought to what could go wrong, then how do you address it when it actually does? So it's almost better to pre-identify it, pre-plan for it. And if it never happens, great, and that's where the discipline that you mentioned comes in, Graham. It's the discipline comes in that, you daily reflect. That's discipline, to set aside time for yourself to reflect daily, right? But there's also, and this isn't stated anywhere, this is my observation, is that it also takes discipline to be able to go into the negative as you're planning your risks. Mm-hmm. And your mitigation. You're going into the negative space because you're thinking of all the things that can go wrong, and that can pull you in and keep you there in the negative.
Yeah.
But the discipline is that if I'm planning for a negative, I don't get stuck in there, because I'm also now planning for a positive to overtake that negative.
Yeah, which seems to address the sort of Pollyanna criticism of Stoicism. Mm-hmm. It's, you're playing on both sides, but you're executing ideally on the one side.
Absolutely. So that, I couldn't have said it better. Where you're actually looking at both sides instead of one side of a coin, right? But like I said, though, there is that discipline, kind of like, police officers and doctors and nurses, they see so much of that negative. It's hard for them to come out of that, right? So when we start, planning, the demise of one of our goals or one of our plans or, one of our notions, then it's easy to get caught up in, well, then why wouldn't that happen? Instead, if it happens, here's what I'm going to do to address that.
Yeah. Then you get target fixation, and all of a sudden you run into that tree you've been staring at.
Exactly.
Yeah. You want to take a little break?
Yeah, let's go for it.
If you're interested in learning more about today's topic, be sure to sign up for our email list at hdtwoshow.substack.com.
And we're back.
Hey. Well, that was a nice dive into the world of Stoicism and minimalism. And it seems
more than you ever wanted to know.
Well, it seems like one of those things. It's like, the whole tip of an iceberg analogy. There's so much to learn, and all the little nooks and crannies and unexplored parts of oneself that it could apply to.
Absolutely. And that's with anything meaningful, I would think, right? Where you delve into it just a little bit, and if it piques your interest, by all means pursue it. And that's why I'm glad you brought it up, so that we can, encourage our listeners to look into Stoicism and or minimalism, not based on, what we've experienced or I've experienced, or because I say it's awesome, meaning look into it for yourself to see if it's something that can help you in your daily life, in all aspects of your life. It's not a religion. And it's not, necessarily Zen, although, meditation is part of anything positive, where you take time out and you, kind of push out all the external stimuli and you focus inwardly. But I think, though, that if you were to look into Stoicism, you might find some nuggets in there that could be helpful or useful. Not just to you, Graham, but again to our listeners. And as I found it, as I looked for it as a coping mechanism, I still turn to it even when things are good, because I think we all owe it to ourselves to look at, okay, even though things are good now, what happens when things do change? Because that's the inevitability, right? Things will change.
Yeah, right. Giving yourself the freedom or the privilege to not have to assign yourself to, you don't have to be a minimalist or a stoic or a vegan, but if you're working toward something, or you're subscribing to that publication, that's just fine. They're not merit badges that you collect and sew onto your shirt. They're belief systems that you actually apply to your life. Well, that's good stuff, man.
Thanks for bringing up a great topic on the Stoicism and, sharing your bike ride adventures, but not just for the sake of the riding, but really it encouraged you to really think beyond the bike ride and really, look into interpersonal dynamics and what everyday situations can do to change those dynamics.
That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Let us know what you like most about this episode. Head over to hdtwoshow.locals.com to join our community or shoot us an email at advice@hdtwo.show. That's advice@hdtwo.show.